Welcome back on the AM show. What is education without funding in our world today? It's an impossibility. Some way, somehow, our students must get funding at the tertiary level. In comes the GETFund. But now there are problems because of that capping, for which reason the National Union of Ghana Students is calling for an uncapping of access for the GETFund to secure the necessary funding for the many add-ons in terms of the numbers who would want to access the fund. Well, what are the dynamics of that situation? We're hosting this morning NUGS President Dennis Appiah Labi Ampofo. Mr. Ampofo, a very good, is it Labi Ampofo? Hyphenated,
yes,
right?
Hyphenated.
Labi Ampofo. Yeah. A very good morning to you.
Thank you very much. Good morning to you too, Benjamin.
The last time we spoke, you were on Zoom, and you're always ferocious on the other end, speaking passionately about students' issues. But let's get the background. How did we get to this point with the capping and now the call? You were in Parliament recently to put a petition together. But how did we get here?
Okay, so thank you very much. A very big good morning to all your listeners and viewers, and then to students of our country. The 10 million of us all across the length and breadth of our country. Somewhere late 1990, ending of the 1990s, there were concerns about how education is being funded in Ghana. The concerns stemmed from the low investment into education. So with the support of the National Union of Ghana Students and the entire student front, there were calls for the establishment of a fund that would have the core value or the core mandate of financing or assisting the finance of education nationwide. So fast forward, the bill was put to Parliament, and then in August 2000, it was assented. In the year 2001, the SY President, Kufuor government, now established the Ghana Education Trust Fund as an administrative body, as per Act 581, to regulate the operation of the GETFund. Quick forward, we have a 2.5 component of the value added tax. That is
2.5%.
2.5%.
GETFund levy.
GETFund levy, as mandated by Act 581.
And now, I went somewhere yesterday. I was just looking.
You realize that if you go to the restaurant or anywhere you go, you eat, you check.
Oh yeah.
And what is the spirit or what is the background of this? This is because the people of Ghana believe so much in education that they would give themselves up to say, whenever we buy something, we want to support education. We want to support the financing of education for young people, because generally we all accept that education is certainly the backbone to the future of our country. So the 2.5 that is paid every percent on every commodity that people buy in shops and what have you goes to support education. That is what the ordinary Ghanaian like yourself, that's what you know. You think, or in your mind, the 2.5 that you are paying is supposed to go to support someone in Axim who is schooling, someone at Tamale Technical University, Cape 3 Point, you know. So in your mind, you are supporting education. So you expect the best out of education. And that is how come that if you look at public tertiary institutions or public institutions, the cost of assessing public institutions is lower, purely because the people of this country have already committed themselves to funding education. So in essence, we are paying for education as Ghanaians, but it is a collective payment that we've been involved in. Move between 2001 down to 2017. The impact of GETFund has been solidly amazing. There are so many institutions that you enter, all you see is GETFund project. You enter institution B, GETFund project. You see a bus branded, donated by GETFund. Beyond that, if you look at a school like University for Development Studies, the whole UDS is engineered on the funding of GETFund.
Right.
If you look at Kumasi Technical University, a lot of infrastructure is engineered on the funding from GETFund. But fast forward in 2017, a bill was laid in Parliament again. A bill that was titled Earmarked Funds Capping and Realignment Bill. 2017, Parliament passed it. What is the meaning of this fund? This fund means that there are so many statutory funds in Ghana about 14 of them are going to be capped or are going to be limited, put into a basket. Then some of the monies that's supposed to go there won't go there, will be redirected into other areas of the government expenditure or the government machinery. The concept or thinking is that some areas, according to the dynamic and the vision of the government, needed more funds at the time.
Right.
So why don't you move excess funds from some places to other places? At the National Union of Ghana Students, we do not have a problem with that. Let's take that on fact. Where the problem comes in is when we add education to those funds. Because education does not have that luxury of limited or excess funding. Education is already pressed in the corner.
Every peso counts.
Every peso counts. You live in your family house of about 5 people. Some receive 5,000, some receive 10,000. Then we say that we are collecting excess funds from everybody into a fund. Then you who receives 500 Ghana cedis to you, your 500 cedis is touched. Meanwhile, you can't even feed. That is the whole concept or the challenge with adding GETFund to the earmarked funds and capping alignment. Then it was passed into Act 947. Act 947 that came into being and currently is known as the biggest enemy to education in Ghana. Since its inception.
Why do you call it that?
By the time,
biggest enemy to education in Ghana.
Yes.
Why do you say that?
By the time we are done, you would understand why it is the single biggest threat to education in Ghana. Let me give you a bit of another delve. GETFund remains the only statutory fund dedicated towards education. Only statutory fund dedicated towards education. Now let's come to 2019. Let's look at what the impact of this act has been on the fund. In 2019, a total of about 1.8 billion was supposed to be accrued from the 2.5 that you pay.
Right.
The 2.5 that our mothers pay. The 2.5 that every single Ghanaian pays in form of taxes, 2.5%. 1.8 billion was supposed to be accrued. But by the powers of this act, the finance ministry only allocated 1.2 billion. That is 66% of the entire fund to education by the actions of, by the powers of this act.
So about 34% was lost.
About 34% was lost. We don't know where it went to.
You don't know where it went to?
Yes, please.
So in terms of accountability,
I can't speak to that. And that is not because it went to GETFund and GETFund decided, or the Ministry of Education decided that it won't use it for education. It did not even go there. It stayed at wherever it was collected.
So as NUGS president, you're telling me you don't even know where those funds ended?
I don't know. I can't speak to those issues. Then in 2020, a total of 2 billion was collected from the Ghanaian people, or was accrued. Let me put that.
And when we mention these figures, someone would ask, I mean, it may be obvious, but someone would ask, what currency? So 2 billion Ghana
2 billion Ghana cedis. Right. Every figure I'm going to be putting out today is in Ghana cedis.
Right.
Then 1.2 billion was allocated to GETFund. That means a decline to 60%.
Which means 800 million.
800 million gone.
Went somewhere else. Was diverted. You would realize there is a consistent dip. And that's why I tell you that it is a so
single...
you moved from 66 to 60%.
66 to 60. We were at 100%, or we're doing better than 60. Now we moved to 66, then to 60. And these monies don't go to the education ministry. So the education ministry doesn't have access to this. Then in 2021, 2.3 billion was to be accrued. 1.4 billion was allocated. Again, 60%. So 40% gone elsewhere. Then in 2022, the biggest challenges started coming. Out of 3.2 billion that was accrued, initially, when the first budget was laid, 81% was supposed to be allocated. So we all felt it was good. I mean, we've gone up. But during the budget review, it was dropped to 56%. So
you say the initial was what?
81.
81%. To 56.
Yes. So it means that we've moved from 60% technically to 56%.
So steady, there's been a steady decline from about 100% or let's say above 90%.
Yes. To 66%, to 60,
and now
56. Good. So now you realize that it's a consistent decline. There's a consistent decline. Now that is not where all the problems are. In 2023, that is this year, the year of our Lord, 4.6 billion is expected to be accrued. The finance ministry lays a budget, and the saddest thing in the 2-decade period of our education over the last 2 decades is that 39% is allocated.
39%.
Yes.
So it would mean that from 66% in what year? Do clarify.
66 in 2019.
2019. So
Yeah.
over a period of about 4
or 5 years, we've dropped to
There's been a decline of about 27%.
up to two. So now we are
in
yes,
GETFund
allocation.
funding or allocation.
Yes. So someone during our protest the last few days, someone had a placard that read, "Even God takes 10%
For tithes.
for tithe, but we are paying 61%." Now,
Don't you feel it could be on the back of the economic situation we find ourselves in? Yes, people like me, like I said yesterday, I did something and I saw the receipt, and of course, we still even have COVID-19 and all of that in there. But I saw clearly GETFund levy, I think 2.5%, and it was taxed. You get it, so I paid. But don't you feel it is on the back of the economic situation we're facing, though we do not know exactly where these funds have been ending up?
So the reason why the excuse of the economic situation will not surface is, first of all, one, this decline did not start last year. It started in 2017 or 2018. So we cannot use this current situation, which I have admitted to that we are in tough times. We cannot use that as a measure.
But the fact that it didn't start from here doesn't mean that this economic situation hasn't exacerbated. Made even more dire.
So the reason why you can't use it as an excuse is that even when this did not exist, you were doing it. So this cannot be an excuse.
Right.
Now hold on.
But
beyond that,
with that same logic, you could say that you were doing it before now, but it's going to get
so now you're going to worse.
It's going to get
that is where
worse.
That's where the principle of what your real commitment towards education is. Now let me give you another.
Are you saying there's no commitment towards
We'll
education?
get to that point very soon, don't worry. We get to a point where we analyze what is the total percentage of GETFund to government revenue. It's 4%.
Okay.
So it really does not save your problems much.
But every little counts. If you looked at our DDEP and you looked at the struggle with even pensioner bondholders and the rest, you would realize that every little
counts. The same every little count will be used very soon. Let's put that one down. Every little counts.
Right.
Every little thing counts. Now, we get into the educational frame, and you realize that education is one of your top priority or your sensitive areas. If you have issues, or if you have challenging issues, one of the key areas that you ought to be quick to find fund to go would be education. Your food, your health, your education. Clearly. So if there is any place that every little counts, really, then it is education. Where you have about over millions of Ghanaian students sitting or in classroom without desks. Every little counts. Where you have students packed up in lecture theatre standing. Where medical school students stand at the windows of gates to listen to human biology lectures. Then every little counts. Where you have student loans unpaid.
You remind me of my days at the University of Ghana. Sometimes the classes would be full and you would have to...
And I'm referring to medical school.
Right.
Medical school. So someone sits behind the window to take lectures for human biology class. Then you get to student loan, where you have second semester arrears. You've launched the brilliant no guarantor policy, and now you have a target of about 70,000 students to service. Then every little counts.
Because there's an increment now.
There is an increment.
Huge increment.
Huge increment. You have a free senior high school policy that has increased your secondary enrollment average to about 80%. Then every little counts. Now the same every little counts brings you to scholarships unpaid, where students are stranded. Then every little counts. You have a lot of reasons to know that every little counts for
because
education.
by extension, if you're bringing in the numbers on free SHS, it also means there are going to be burgeoning numbers getting into the tertiary institutions, and there are going to be more people who would require GETFund funding.
One, why do they require GETFund funding? Now we move to what the situation or the situation has been this year, and why we are extremely worried that there is an attack on education this year. If you look at the global average, what is the global average expected of government that Ghana is a part of? The global average is that your total expenditure, the global average with international community standards, which we have signed on to, is between 15 to 20%. Governments all over the world, to be counted as doing well or progressing, is expected to allocate 15 to 20% of the entire expenditure towards education. Last year we did 17, which was good. Previously we've been doing an average of 17, which is very good for us as a country. But imagine this year we are doing 12.9.
So it's a fall.
It's a huge fall.
We were doing above the 15%.
Just last year we were doing 17.
Right. And now we've fallen to 12.
12.9.
5 percentage point decrease.
And that is hugely serious because you realize that if you look at the GDP figures too, you're expected to do between 4 and 6% of your GDP into education. Last year we did 4.03%. This year we are doing 3.09. So on all fronts, there is a
So that's practically a shade of
1%
less than
GDP.
What we
did last year. Total expenditure for education this year is about 24 billion. 24 billion. And that represents just a 12.9% of expenditure on the entire government machinery or government budget. But what is the standard? Where do we want to go? Look at the gap between secondary school enrollment and tertiary enrollment. Secondary school enrollment is doing 70 to 80% by the intervention of the government. Tertiary enrollment is between 18 to 20%, Benjamin. That is serious. The gap is huge. So where do our people go to after secondary school? Where do they enter? What is the fate of these young people? If we were doing above 30%, it would have been okay. That's an average, global average of about 35%. Now, this is the situation. And to show you...
By extension, our TVET system, yes, there are moves to enhance that, but it isn't where we want it to. And which means if these people don't make it to the tertiary institutions, what are the skills they may have? Where are they going to
What is our country doing?
What are they going to be doing?
What are they going to be doing? So then they fall into the bracket of illiteracy back. Now, I bring you to one of the most dangerous things that we want to highlight.
Maybe not technically illiteracy, but unemployment.
Unemployment, let me put it that way. This year is the lowest percentage of funding towards education in the last 20 years. Last 20 years. This is the lowest. And why is it the lowest? Because of issues such as GETFund capping. Now, let me bring you down to the real impact of GETFund capping.
And I was about to get to that, so you go straight ahead.
Yes. So someone may wonder, what is really happening with GETFund capping? Yes, we understand that we pay monies, which we pay because it's supposed to go to education, but it does not go to education. Now, first of all, what the ordinary Ghanaian is supposed to understand listening to me today is that whenever you buy a product, you support education. In 2000, every one of us was convinced that let's pay monies to support education. But in simple terms, that money is not going into education. Simpliciter. That is a simple explanation to it. Now, I bring you to the impact. I mentioned to you that student loans are unpaid from second semester arrears. Last week, we had some money paid to student loans and the amount of relief it brought into our country. But even with that, why is student loan always in arrears? You always hear us complaining, the student loans are not good, the student loans why is it in arrears? Because according to the Student Loan Trust Fund Act, there is an amount of money that's supposed to move from GETFund to student loan. So take GETFund as the daddy of the house, who finances every aspect of the house. So the entire Ministry of Education is struggling because its main financing model or financing source independently, which is not on discretion, is struggling. So I've shown you student loan. Now bring you to infrastructure deficit. The level of infrastructure deficit in our various institutions have been occasioned by the struggling of GETFund, because GETFund is built to finance infrastructure projects, huge infrastructure projects. We cannot necessarily expect that universities IGF will do infrastructure, because that has a rippling effect, and that brings me to the next impact: rising school fees. So if you look at the bills from our tertiary institutions, there are some lining items you will find: accommodation levy, lecture theatre levy. Students are being levied to build lecture theatres. But that is not their job. The job of GETFund is to build infrastructure, is to provide infrastructure support, just like it happens in our universities. Now let me bring you to what happens to the 21 agencies in the Ministry of Education who receive funding or funding support from GETFund. At the end of the day, you've given the Ministry of Education a job to do, but you've not provided the requisite tools to execute that job. Now, you've heard about the issues of YEA, the non-payment of YEA personnel and what have you.
Right.
This is also because of GETFund capping.
All of that is tied to it.
All of that. Because according to the YEA Act, about 5% money, some money is supposed to move from GETFund to YEA. So then I bring you to the YEA issues too. Now, you've heard about scholarship secretariat, right. The challenges of the scholarship secretariat. Funds not moving, payment, non-payment, and every day we are bashing the scholarship secretariat.
Does that include the payment of stipends
yes,
to our brothers and sisters in different parts of the world?
Please.
And I always bring up that issue because I was in Cuba many years ago on scholarship.
Okay.
You know, I read Spanish and I...
Oh, okay.
And in those months that it did not come, trust me, it was not, it's not a very pleasant experience being in someone else's country, wholly reliant on these funds, well, for most people, and seeing them not come through. It can be deadly.
So now you realize the perspective or the magnitude of what we are dealing with, the impact of capping GETFund on so many areas. So you hear students in UK crying every day, scholarship secretariat.
I have a doctor friend in the UK currently whose stipends have not come through in a while.
And you realize...
And this is what they use to pay their utilities and everything.
You realize the amount of bashing that goes to some of these agencies. But this is connected to it because GETFund is supposed to allocate monies to scholarship secretariat to support the funding of scholarship secretariat. Now I bring you to even GES. Some of the basic education infrastructure deficits. You've done a lot of documentaries, a lot of news items on some of the situation of schools in our basic schools, in our primary schools. It is a mandate of the GETFund to provide support to Ghana Education Service to complete some of these projects. Now, GTEC, the Ghana Tertiary Education Commission, who is also supposed to provide monies for our tertiary institutions. One of the specific parts is our training colleges or our colleges of education. If you get into our colleges of education, you realize that the infrastructure deficit is worse than what is happening in our universities. This is where it's coming from.
Tell me though, when it comes to the tertiary level, I mean, this is a widespread problem from all the levels of education. But when it comes to the tertiary level, what has been the real impact? How many people are affected by this? Can you give us a ballpark figure in terms of those who need to secure GETFund or get funding so as to be able to pay their fees, move on, and who are not having access to it? Can you give us a ballpark figure?
So for every single tertiary institution you have in our country, all is affected.
Talking of government?
Yes, government supported. And even with the private, I'll come there. Then you look at our students who are on student loan. About currently we have about 20 to 30,000 on our student loan system. All of them are affected. If you look at about our 9 million students in basic education or in the basic education are affected. About our 2.3 million students who do not have access to DEX are affected. About our over 3,000 schools under trees are affected. Now, let me bring you to some perspective issues. If you look at, someone will ask, how much has been diverted so far? Over 3.6 billion has been diverted over the last 4 or 5 years.
What could that have done in the education?
All single schools under trees could have been eliminated because the amount of money needed to eliminate all schools under tree is pegged around 3 billion.
So with those 3.6 billion,
we could have eliminated all schools under
trees.
So now you realize that it affects every fabric of our educational perspective. And now, to one of the very worrying issues, if you've noticed, the Ministry of Education has started the STEM schools. So 2 angles where I want Ghanaians to be very passionate about and be strong on our cause to uncap GETFund. One is our STEM schools, that's the science, technology, engineering, and mathematics schools. Secondary schools which are dedicated purely for STEM. I saw one from Awaso, beautiful. One Bosomche, beautiful. Beautiful schools with so much to offer our country. Imagine the number of schools that this 3.7 billion can, over 100 of them. And imagine the impact it could have on us. Now look at CTVET. CTVET is our drive towards tertiary technical and vocational education. I have said that one of the most strong or one of the most performing aspects of our education over the last 5 years has been our TVET drive. It is not where we want it to be, but then clearly there's been so much investment in our technical and vocational. You look at the equipment we are buying for them. CTVET is funded by GETFund. Technical and vocational education has funding coming from GETFund. So now, Benjamin, ask yourself, how are we going to drive STEM and CTVET? The minister is all over the place. The CTVET commission is all over the place, trying to do all of the things that they're doing. But the biggest question is, where do they get funding to run these things, the vision that they've outlined, if these things, the fund does not go? Now, why must we uncap GETFund? Why must we uncap GETFund? The first reason why we must uncap GETFund is that there is a social contract between this government and the people of Ghana. What kind of social contract am I talking about? One of the most notable visions of His Excellency Nana Addo Dankwa Akufo-Addo has been education. He's received commendation from the National Union of Ghana Students from so much of the interventions he's put into. In fact, currently he serves as the chairperson for the coalition of 20 countries who have reaffirmed their commitment to SDG 4. Look at the Minister of Education, typical educationist with STEM as his vision. The contract between them and the people of this country is to see education as a priority, education growing and thriving. You do not have such a contract with people, and then it becomes a challenge funding it. Then secondly, in 1999 to 2000, when the National Union of Ghana Students was invited to discuss GETFund, it was at the backdrop of the promise that it would go into education. How would governments come to students again to tell us that indeed, let's pay another levy for education? It will be difficult to convince any student because the one we paid is currently declining, which is likely to get to 20% one day.
I mean, not just students, but the generality of
the people.
Because if my 2.5% is not ending up where it ought to in terms of facilitating education,
then it becomes
who are at the tertiary level, who need it, then it becomes
a problem. Problematic. So now, the way forward, or where are we going to? What is the way out?
You sent a petition to Parliament in recent times.
Yes, please.
Do you feel maybe we need legislation to deal with this diversion? Maybe to be specific in terms of where it is going, and if it is not going into the GETFund, wherever it goes, maybe appropriations to be made from there over time for replacements. What is your thinking on that? So
the issue of legislation is very real because it was out of legislation that this capping came into being. So there are only two ways that the education GETFund survives. Either the Ministry of Finance says that it's okay, we've lifted GETFund. Because I spoke to the ranking committee member of education in Parliament, and the understanding from the Education Select Committee is that when the capping regime was being initiated, it was supposed to be for a time period, and then they stop it.
How long has the capping been going on?
The Act is Act 947 since 2017. So from 2018, there's been a steady decline. Now, how do we handle this is by the Ministry of Finance saying that I believe that the Ministry of Education and all the education agencies deserve the funds, need the fund, badly need the funds, so we won't touch it again. Or the same way, my mother will tell you, baby, the same way that Parliament gave it authorization. So Parliament cannot be exonerated out of this or cannot be shielded out of this. Parliament gave its blessing through the passing of the Act to cap GETFund and to stifle education of its very needed funds. So Parliament must undo the harm. How? Currently, there is a private members' bill in Parliament, which was laid in 2022 on the 29th of November, which seeks to uncap GETFund and to allow GETFund have access to all of its funds.
What's going to be your push on that?
Our petition touches on that extremely. Our petition touches on just two requests. Request 1, reject the 2023 proposed formula for distribution of GETFund funds. So every year there is a formula that is used to disburse. The Select Committee of Education has a responsibility. Their responsibility is to intervene and protect education. Their responsibility is that the schools in their constituencies, which are not in good shape, deserves funding. Their responsibility is to make laws that protect the future of young people in this country. So the first thing they must do quickly is to reject the formula for disbursing GETFund. Reject it wholly and fully. There cannot be any meaningful discussion about funding education in this country when GETFund is still uncapped. It's still capped. When GETFund is changed, our education is changed because education is expensive every part of the world. After that, quickly, the entirety of Parliament must move in a single file quickly for the sake of the young people in their constituencies. MPs must be worried about the schools under trees in their constituencies. If MPs are not worried about the schools under trees in their constituencies, about the training colleges in their constituencies who lack funding, about their constituents who do not have their stipend space, for student loan trust fund monies which are not going to their constituents, then parliamentarians really have a big questions to answer to Ghanaians. In all humility, they must quickly move to uncap GETFund. Set GETFund free, unchain GETFund, and ensure that GETFund has access to all its monies, so that the Ministry of Education can pursue the STEM agenda, so that the government of this country can pursue the CTVET, and that will only come from Parliament, because Parliament remains the last watchdog. As the National Union of Ghana Students, we've come to Parliament with our plea. We've petitioned the Select Committee on Education. We are hoping that by close of this week, we hear from Parliament. We are hoping that by the close of this week, the Select Committee on Education... Did you
give them any deadline?
We didn't give ultimatum. We've refrained from giving ultimatums because we realize that it really doesn't work. There must be the will. There must be the political will. People must commit to what is necessary for our country. People must see our education as the only way of unlocking the potential of young people in our country. And that means investment into it.
Right.
So if we are not going to find discretionary funds to put into education, the statutory funding must not be touched, because the moment we continue the line we are on, then all the rhetoric about our commitment to education does not hold.
Okay. So we're capping off the conversation now, and when you spoke about setting the GETFund free, you reminded me of the Bible. Let my people go. Pharaoh,
so I think that that's the conversation. I mean, the plea can also go to the Minister for Finance, Honorable Kenneth Friata. We are begging him. The students of this country are begging him, Honorable, let our monies go, because even God takes 10%. So for us to be paying 61%.
And over the years, you've moved from 66% to 39%, which is a difference of 27%. That's a whopping sum. You say what, 3.2 billion?
Yes.
Is what has been lost.
3.7.
3.7 billion.
Yeah. So for me, I mean, my concern mainly is considering the vision, the commitment that we've heard from the government. I think that commitment must be backed by funding. It must be backed by investment.
We must put our money basically where our mouths are.
So if we believe that we need to move STEM very well, then we must resource the Ministry of Education. Right. Then we must resource a GETFund to support some of these things. If we really believe in youth employment at Youth Employment Agency, then what we must do is that we must fund Youth Employment Agency. At the end of the day, as the National Union of Ghana Students, we remain committed to being the conscience of the nation. For myself as president and the team I work with, the young people across the country, all we are saying is that our future lies in the hands of our parliamentarians. The educational future lies in the hands of our parliamentarians. And you know the painful part, most of our parliamentarians were part of the struggles to establish GETFund. All of them were part of establishing GETFund. This is the time for the leaders of this country to reassure the young people that indeed we believe in education.
And something you said that will ring in my head for a while, there's an attack on education this year. And there are reasons, if you follow the conversation, for his saying that. But Dennis, thank you for joining us.
Thank you very much for having me.
I
think we are grateful to We are grateful for the effort you put in amplifying our voices. I mean, you've given us the time to be heard. It's a huge one for us as a student fund for our country.
Well, you should be thanking the Multimedia Group Limited, and we always stand for this. We try to be a voice for the voiceless. So thank you as well for doing what you do. Dennis Apia Labiampofo is the president of NUGS, and he is pushing this agenda. Uncap the GETFund. And he is pushing for legislation in that respect. Do stay with us, because when we return from the break, there's still a lot more coming your way before we cap off the show. It's all about the Head of State Awards and the Australian High Commission. Now, what is that marriage going to yield? We'll be telling you more about that right after the break.